Are some storms that roll in not from the sky, but from the quiet crossroads of a life, and Amara's storm had a man's face. It began on a Tuesday, a day painted in the muted grey of an impending Lagos rain. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant hum of the city, a sound that rarely reached her small, tidy bungalow nestled on the quiet outskirts of EPE. For 2 years since her parents had passed, leaving her the house and a silence that filled every room, Amara's life had followed a rhythm of gentle solitude. She ran a small online fabric store, her days measured by the click of her keyboard, the whir of her sewing machine, and the soft rustle of Ankara prints. Loneliness had become a familiar blanket, one she had learned to wrap herself in for warmth, even on the hottest of days. That evening, returning from the local market with a basket of fresh vegetables, her headlights cut through the descending dusk and fell upon a shape huddled by the roadside near the overgrown path that led to her gate. It was a man, lying crumpled and still, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the rain that had just begun to fall. This was Lagos. Caution was a language everyone spoke from birth. Her first instinct, sharp and insistent, was to drive on, to lock her doors and pretend she had seen nothing but a pile of discarded clothes. She pictured herself inside, the bolt sliding across the door, the world and its dangers shut out. But as the rain intensified, fat, heavy drops splattering against her windscreen like frantic fists, a force stronger than fear held her in place. She saw a hand twitch, a small, desperate movement in the mud. It was a flicker of life in the gloom, a signal that she could not ignore. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Amara pulled over, her tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. She left the engine running, its low thrum a comforting presence, and the headlights slicing through the downpour. She grabbed the heavy maglite from her glove compartment, its cold, metallic weight a small reassurance, and stepped out into the rain. The sudden chill seeped into her bones, a stark contrast to the warmth of the car. He was dressed in what had once been an expensive suit, the fine fabric now torn and stained with mud and something darker, something her mind refused to name. His face was a canvas of bruises and cuts, one eye swollen completely shut. He was breathing, but it was a shallow, ragged sound, a fragile thread in the roaring dark. "Sir," she called out, her voice trembling slightly, nearly lost in the sound of the rain. "Sir, what happened to you?" He stirred, a low moan escaping his lips, a sound of pure agony. His open eye fluttered, trying to focus on the beam of her torch, but there was no recognition in it, only a vast, empty sea of confusion and pain. A part of her, the sensible, self-preservationist part, screamed to run, to get back in the car and call the police from the safety of her home. But another, softer part, the part that remembered her mother tending to stray, broken-winged birds, the part that felt the persistent ache of her own solitude, saw not a threat, but a broken soul adrift in a storm. "Oh God, no?" she whispered to herself, the maglite revealing the full extent of his injuries. The rain was plastering his dark hair to his scalp, washing rivulets of grime from his face. He was drowning in the mud, in his own oblivion. In that moment, a choice was made, not in her head, but in her heart. "I'm going to help you," she said, her voice firmer now, more to convince herself than him. Just hope you're a good person." With a surge of adrenaline and a strength she didn't know she possessed, Amara managed to half drag, half lift him. He was heavy, a dead weight of unconsciousness, and his body slumped against hers. She struggled, her feet slipping in the slick mud, the rain relentless. Finally, she got him into the passenger seat of her car, his head lolling against the window. By the time she slammed the door shut, she was soaked to the skin, her clothes heavy with rainwater, her body shaking from both cold and exertion. Back in her house, the familiar silence felt different, charged with the presence of this stranger. It was no longer empty, it was waiting. She laid him on the worn sofa in her living room, the one her father used to nap on. With trembling hands, she fetched her first aid box. As she cleaned his wounds with Dettol and warm water, her touch gentle and methodical, she saw him up close. He had a strong jaw, now marred by a deep gash, and long eyelashes resting against a bruised cheek. He was someone's son, perhaps someone's husband. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. For hours, as the storm raged outside, she sat in the armchair opposite, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, a stranger's life now tethered irrevocably to her own. He woke 3 days later. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. Amara was in the kitchen, the rich, nutty scent of simmering egusi soup filling the small house, a comforting aroma of normalcy. She heard a groan, and her head snapped up. She hurried into the living room, her heart pounding. He was sitting up, his hands pressed to his head, his face a mask of profound bewilderment. Did you save me?" he asked, his voice hoarse, a dry rasp that spoke of disuse. Amara's heart did a little jump. "You're finally awake," she said, her voice soft, trying to soothe the fear she saw in his eyes. She moved closer, offering him a glass of water she had kept ready. "Easy now. You've been unconscious for a while." He drank greedily, his eyes never leaving her face. They were kind eyes, she noted, a deep, warm brown, despite the confusion swimming in them. The swelling had gone down, revealing a face that was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way. "Thank you," he managed, his throat still raw after he'd drained the glass. "Thank you for helping me." "Do you remember what happened?" she asked gently, taking the empty glass from him. He looked away, his gaze sweeping over the unfamiliar room, the bookshelf filled with her parents' old novels, the framed photos of the family on the mantelpiece, the colourful Ankara cushions she had sewn herself. His brow furrowed in concentration, but it was like staring at a blank wall. He shook his head slowly, a flicker of raw fear crossing his features. "No," he whispered, "I don't remember anything. Not how I got here. Not even who did this to me." He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. "I don't even know my own name." A cold dread washed over Amara. Amnesia. It was a word from movies and books, not something that happened in real life, in her living room. "You need to be careful," she found herself saying, a protective instinct rising in her, fierce and unexpected. "Someone out there doesn't want you getting better." His eyes met hers again, a silent plea in their depths that spoke volumes. Can I stay at your place for a few days, just until I recover? I have nowhere else to go." Hesitation warred with compassion. She was a single woman living alone. Sheltering an unknown man was a risk beyond measure in a city like Lagos. What would the neighbors think? What dangers was she inviting into her home? "But I don't even know who you are," she said, the words sounding weaker than she intended, a flimsy shield against the pull of his vulnerability. A wry, humorless smile touched his lips, a flicker of a personality buried deep beneath the confusion. "I don't know who I am either," he said. "Right now, all I want is a bath." That simple human request broke through her remaining defenses. For the next week, a new rhythm established itself in the quiet house. Amara nursed him, changing his bandages, cooking him nourishing meals of pounded yam and bitterleaf soup, and leaving him to rest. She learned that his name was Chaika, or at least that's what she decided to call him, after finding the name delicately engraved on the inside of a silver ring he wore on a chain around his neck. He had no memory of it. He also had a wedding band on his left hand, a simple, solid gold ring that felt like a barrier between them, a silent reminder of a life and a love he couldn't recall. He would stare at it for long stretches, twisting it around his finger, his brow furrowed, but no answers came. Slowly, Cheek regained his physical strength. The bruises on his face faded from angry purple to a pale mottled yellow, and the cuts began to knit themselves closed. With his physical recovery came a tentative emotional connection. They talked for hours, filling the silence Amara had grown so used to. She told him about her parents, how her father taught her to bargain at the market, and how her mother taught her to sew. She spoke of her small dream to one day open a physical shop for her fabrics. He, in turn, could only speak of the present, his confusion, his frustration, and his overwhelming gratitude to her. He was a good listener, his attention focused and unwavering, making her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Their interactions were filled with small, unspoken kindnesses. He would insist on helping her in the kitchen, his large frame looking out of place, but his movements gentle and surprisingly careful. She would find him watching her as she worked on her sewing machine, a soft, curious expression on his face, as if he were trying to memorize the way the light caught her hair. A spark ignited between them, a low, warm hum of attraction that neither of them dared to acknowledge. For Amara, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was drawn to his gentle nature, his quiet strength, the raw vulnerability in his eyes. But the gold ring on his finger was a constant, glaring reminder that he belonged to someone else, to a life he couldn't remember. One afternoon he was helping her chop wood for the cooking stove, a task he'd taken upon himself with a surprising eagerness. He swung the axe with a natural fluid grace, his muscles flexing under the thin fabric of his borrowed shirt. Amara watched him from the kitchen doorway, her heart doing a familiar, traitorous flutter. He paused, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and caught her gaze. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unguarded smile that made him look years younger, erasing the last shadows of his ordeal. "What?" he asked, his voice a low, teasing rumble. "Nothing," she said, a blush creeping up her neck. You seem to know what you're doing." "It feels familiar," he admitted, looking at the axe in his hands as if it held a secret. "Like I've done this before." As he spoke, he dropped a piece of wood and bent to pick it up, his foot slipping on a loose patch of earth. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, but not before another log rolled and bumped his foot. He winced, hopping for a moment. "Careful," she cried, rushing forward, her hands hovering as if to steady him. "I'm fine," he said, laughing it off. He looked at her, his smile fading into something more serious, more intimate. "Amara, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you live here all alone?" "Yeah, why?" "It just feels strange," he said, his gaze drifting towards the quiet house, a place that had become his sanctuary. "Strange that I don't have a husband?" she asked, a defensive edge sharpening her tone, a shield for her old loneliness. "Yeah," he admitted softly, his eyes full of a gentle curiosity that disarmed her. A pang of that familiar solitude hit her. "My parents passed away 2 years ago. I've been alone ever since," she explained, her voice quiet. "The right man just hasn't come along." "And what would the right man be like?" he asked, his voice low, drawing her into a circle of confidence. She thought for a moment, the question unexpectedly stirring her heart. "First, honest," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Second, respectful. And third, someone who doesn't drop firewood on his foot." He chuckled, a warm, rich sound that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. I guess I already lost a point." His expression turned serious again. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head when she looked at him questioningly. "It's just, you're a really beautiful woman, Amara." The words hung in the air, charged and dangerous. Amara's breath hitched in her throat. "Why would you say that?" she whispered, her gaze dropping instinctively to the gold ring on his finger. "You're married." "You don't know that," he countered gently, taking a small step closer. "And neither do I." "What about the ring?" "Maybe it doesn't mean anything." "Or maybe it does," she retorted, the word a shield. She took a step back, the invisible wall between them rising once more, thick and impenetrable. "I don't want you saying things like that to me again." He looked hurt, a flash of his old vulnerability returning to his eyes. The light in them dimmed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." He turned back to the woodpile, the easy warmth of the moment shattered, leaving only a tense, complicated silence in its wake. Miles away, in a lavishly furnished penthouse apartment in Ikoyi that overlooked the lagoon, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Adiza sipped her Chardonnay, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the crystal glass. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with a face that could grace the cover of any magazine. But her eyes held a cold, calculating hardness that no amount of makeup could conceal. Across from her, Paul paced the length of the marble floor, a lion in a gilded cage, repeatedly running a hand through his expensive haircut. "Did you find him?" she asked, her voice sharp as broken glass, cutting through the low hum of the air conditioner. Paul stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, it's like he vanished into thin air. I've checked the hospitals, the private clinics, even the morgues. Nothing." Adiza let out a hiss of frustration, slamming her glass down on the polished table with a crack. "You had one job, Paul. One job, and you screwed it up." "This is your fault," he shot back, his voice rising, his composure finally cracking. "You were supposed to give him enough to make him pass out for hours, not just dazed. He was stronger than we thought. And you were supposed to make sure he stayed down," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "Now we're in danger. My husband is out there somewhere, a loose end that could unravel everything we've built. We need to find him before he walks into a police station and we end up in Kirikiri prison." "He shouldn't be far," Paul muttered, more to himself than to her, trying to regain control. "He got a good beating. He can't have gotten far." He stopped pacing and looked at her, a glimmer of their shared ambition and ruthless greed hardening his eyes. "We find him, and this time we finish it. No mistakes." Their search grew more frantic, fueled by the corrosive fear of exposure. They had been siphoning money from Cheek's company for over a year, a sophisticated scheme of false invoices and phantom suppliers that had made them extravagantly wealthy. Chaik, a man whose greatest flaw was his unwavering trust in his wife and his best friend, had finally started getting suspicious. He'd hired an independent auditor. The night he was supposed to see the preliminary report was the night they had lured him to an isolated, company-owned warehouse, planning to drug him, stage a carjacking gone wrong, and make him disappear long enough for them to liquidate their assets and escape the country. But he had fought back with unexpected strength, escaped into the rainy night, and now he was a ticking time bomb. It was Paul who finally found a lead. A contact who worked for a mobile network provider for a hefty price traced the last ping from Chaik's phone to a cell tower covering the rural EPE area. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was all they had. They drove out in Adiza's sleek black Mercedes, a stark symbol of their stolen wealth against the rustic backdrop. They showed his photograph at every small shop, every roadside buka, their story polished and convincing. A beloved husband and friend, a tragic victim of a brutal robbery. "Please, have you seen him?" For days they found nothing. Then a market woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, recognized him. "En, that man?" she said, squinting at the glossy photo. "I see him with Amara, the girl way they sell cloth. The one way her house day for inside. Hope, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, surged through Adiza. They had found him. The black Mercedes pulled up to Amara's gate just as she and Cheek were sharing a quiet lunch of jollof rice on the veranda. The sound of the expensive engine was an intrusion, a violation of the fragile peace they had built within the walls of her home. A woman stepped out, elegant and poised even on the dusty, uneven path. She was followed by a man in a sharp, tailored suit. "Cheek," the woman called out, her voice a carefully crafted mixture of relief and reproach. Chaik froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, his mind a complete blank slate. Amara felt a cold, heavy knot form in the pit of her stomach. This was it. The past had come to claim him. The woman rushed forward, her eyes filling with tears that didn't seem to reach them, glistening like crocodile tears. "Oh, my love, Chaik, you're finally here. I thought something bad had happened to you." She threw her arms around him. Chaik remained stiff, his body unresponsive, a statue in her embrace. "Am I married?" he asked, his voice a choked whisper, his eyes finding Amara's over the woman's shoulder, a look of desperate appeal in them. "Yes, I'm your wife," the woman said, pulling back to look at him, her expression a perfect blend of concern and hurt. "It's me, Adize. Don't you remember me?" He shook his head slowly, the movement almost imperceptible. "I don't know who you are. I don't remember you." "Oh my God," Adize cried, clutching her chest in a theatrical gesture. "My love, but look how those thieves left you. They hit you so hard." "Thieves," Cheek repeated, latching onto the word, a plausible explanation for his state. Yes, the man Paul interjected smoothly, stepping forward to complete the circle of deceit. That's the hypothesis the police are using. You disappeared with your vehicle. We've been searching everywhere for you. He clapped a hand on Chaik's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be friendly, but felt possessive. I'm your best friend, man. We haven't rested. It was all too much. The wife, the best friend, the story of thieves, it spun around Chaika, a dizzying vortex of a life he didn't recognize. He felt Adiz's hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, pulling him towards the car. He looked back at Amara, his eyes filled with a desperate silent apology and a confusion that tore at her heart. Thank you very much for taking care of him, Ade said to Amara, her tone dripping with a sweetness that felt utterly false. She opened her chic designer purse and pulled out a thick wad of Naira notes, trying to press them into Amara's hand. I'm going to pay you back. Amara recoiled as if burned, pulling her hand back. No, she said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through the charade. I don't want that money. I didn't do it for money. Adize shrugged, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfect features before she stuffed the cash back into her purse. Okay, she said dismissively. With one last triumphant, possessive glance at Amara, she guided a bewildered Chaik into the plush leather back seat of the car. As the Mercedes drove away, kicking up a cloud of red dust, Amara stood on the veranda, the silence of the house rushing back in to reclaim its territory, colder and emptier than ever before. The house in Ikoyi was a palace of glass and chrome, a world away from the simple, earthy warmth of Amara's home. It felt cold, sterile, and utterly foreign to Chaika. Adize fluttered around him, a whirlwind of feigned affection, while Paul maintained a constant, watchful presence, his best friend act wearing thin around the edges. They told him about his life, his successful logistics company, their circle of wealthy friends, their favorite restaurants. It was like listening to a story about a stranger, a well-written but emotionally hollow biography. His heart remained a locked room, and the only key, it seemed, had been left with Amara. He felt no connection to Adeze. Her touch made his skin crawl, and her proprietary air felt like a cage closing around him, suffocating him. My love, I missed you, she purred one evening, sliding up behind him as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city lights. She tried to pull him into an embrace in their vast, impersonal bedroom. He gently but firmly pushed her away. Adeze, I still can't remember anything. This is all very strange for me. Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, the mask of wifely concern slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. Well, I'm going to make you remember very well how good we are together, she said, her voice a husky, threatening promise. I'm not ready yet, he insisted, backing away, feeling trapped. Her patience, a shallow reservoir at the best of times, snapped. Is it because of that village peasant? She spat, her voice venomous, the ugly truth of her jealousy laid bare. Are you still thinking of her? No, he lied, though Amara's face was a constant vivid image in his mind. I just need time. Well, I'm your wife, she said, her voice hard as diamonds, and you have a duty to please me. He escaped to the balcony, the cool night air a welcome relief from the cloying atmosphere inside. But what's wrong with me, he wondered, his hands gripping the cool glass railing. Why can't I stop thinking about Amara? Her name was a balm to his fractured mind, a single point of light in the overwhelming darkness. In this cold, luxurious prison, the memory of her kindness, her quiet strength, her warm, genuine smile was the only thing that felt real. He was married to a beautiful woman, he lived in a mansion. He had a best friend by his side, but his heart felt like it had been left behind in a small bungalow on the outskirts of EPE. He couldn't stay away. A few days later, feeling suffocated by the lies and the oppressive luxury, he made his move. Under the pretense of wanting to get some fresh air and clear his head, a story they readily accepted, he took one of the cars and drove. He didn't know the way, not consciously, but his hands seemed to remember the turns, his heart acting as an unerring compass. He found her house, the familiar sight of the tidy bungalow, settling something deep and anxious within him. Amara was in her garden, tending to her tomato plants, her back to the road. She looked up when she heard the car, a frown of puzzlement on her face that melted into stunned surprise. "Cheek," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, the words tumbling out of him in a desperate rush before he could stop them. He got out of the car and walked towards her, closing the distance between them. "Chaik, you're married," she said, her voice firm, but her eyes betraying her own inner conflict. She took a step back, putting a row of plants between them. "I don't feel anything for her," he insisted, his voice raw with emotion. "My body rejects her. It feels like I don't know her. But when I think of you—" He trailed off, his gaze intense and unwavering. "My heart can't forget you." "No, please leave," she pleaded, though her voice lacked conviction. "What you're saying is not right." "If I could only remember what happened to me," he said in sheer frustration, running a hand through his hair, "then I would know what is right." Amara looked at him, at the profound turmoil in his eyes, and a decision, bold and reckless, formed in her mind. She had heard stories from her grandmother, tales of old remedies, of ways to unlock what was hidden deep in the mind. It was a risk, a leap into a world of faith and mystery, but she couldn't bear to see him so lost and tormented. "You know," she said slowly, her voice taking on a new gravity, I know someone who might be able to help with that." She told him about Mama Ife, an old herbalist who lived deeper in the village, a woman said to possess ancient knowledge passed down through generations. "She makes a drink from special herbs. They say it can help one. Remember." "What if I drink it and I just forget about you?" he asked, the question laced with a fear that touched her deeply. "I don't know," she answered honestly, her gaze steady. "But in the end, you might remember your life. You might get it back. That's what matters." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, a silent promise of support. "A true feeling can't be erased by anything or anyone. Take the chance. It will define your path." He trusted her implicitly. The next day he returned, and they went to see Mama Efe. Her hut was small and dark, filled with the rich, earthy scent of dried leaves, wood smoke, and something else, something ancient and mysterious. The old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, looked at Chaik with eyes that seemed to see right through his confusion and into his soul. She listened to their story without a word, her head cocked to one side, then nodded slowly. She moved with a timeless grace, preparing the drink, a dark, thick liquid in a small, worn calabash. "It smells strong," Cheek said, his voice hesitant as she handed it to him. "It is the drink of truth," Mama Ife said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "It will show you what is hidden. Do not fight it. Let it guide you." He drank it. The taste was bitter, earthy, and it seemed to hum on his tongue. Amara led him back to her house and had him lie down on the sofa, the same one where she had first tended to his wounds, bringing their journey full circle. "Now go to sleep," she whispered, placing a cool, reassuring hand on his forehead. "I'll stay here with you. Try to connect with your spirit and remember who you are." He closed his eyes and the world dissolved. He fell not into sleep, but into a kaleidoscope of swirling colors and fragmented images. He saw a boardroom, papers with figures that swam before his eyes. He heard his own voice, sharp with a suspicion he didn't recognize. "The numbers aren't adding up, Paul." He saw Adiz's smile, beautiful but cold as ice. "Don't worry so much, my love. You have us to handle things." Then the scene shifted violently. He was in a dark, cavernous warehouse, the air thick with the smell of dust and deceit. He saw Paul's face, not friendly, but twisted with greed and something that looked like envy. He saw Adizi, not loving but ruthless and cold. He knows too much. "We have to stop him." He felt a sharp prick in his neck, a drug spreading like fire through his veins, making his limbs heavy, his thoughts syrupy and slow. He felt the brutal, jarring impact of a blow to his head, then another. He saw their faces looming over him as he fought against the encroaching blackness, a raw, primal survival instinct pushing him to run, to stumble out of the warehouse and escape into the stormy, indifferent night. The images came faster, clearer, a torrent of truth that washed away the weeks of lies. He saw it all, the betrayal, the greed, the cold-blooded attempt on his life. He woke with a violent gasp, his body drenched in cold sweat. Amara was there instantly, her face etched with concern. "It was them," he croaked, his voice filled with a new, chilling certainty. "Who?" "My wife, and my supposed best friend. They did this to me." "Did you see them?" "They were in my dream," he said, sitting up, his mind clear and sharp for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory. The fog had lifted, revealing a stark and horrifying landscape of treachery. But why? He wondered aloud, though the answer was already forming. Money. "You'll have to investigate that yourself," Amara said softly, her hand resting on his arm, grounding him. A hard, dangerous resolve settled in his features, chasing away the last remnants of the lost, confused man he had been. "You're absolutely right," he said, his voice cold as steel. "I'm going to face them." "No, Chaik, no. Call the police," she urged, her eyes wide with fear for him. "I can't," he said, his mind racing, piecing together a plan. "Not yet. They're smart, they've covered their tracks. I have to gather evidence. I need undeniable proof." "Are you going to go alone?" "Yes." "I'll go with you," she said, her voice resolute, leaving no room for argument. "No, Amara, it could be dangerous." She met his gaze, her own filled with a fierce determination he had never seen before. "I told you I can take care of myself," she said, and in her strength he found his own. He returned to the house in Ikoyi a different man. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful clarity that was unsettling. Adizi met him at the door, her fake smile faltering at the sight of his hard, unreadable expression. "Adizi," he called out, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "Where did you go? I was so worried," she began, rushing towards him with her arms outstretched. He held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I went to the police station to find out about my case," he said, his eyes boring into hers, pinning her in place. "And guess what? There is not a single complaint filed, no report of a robbery, no missing persons case under my name." A flicker of panic, quick as a hummingbird's wing, crossed her eyes before she masked it. "It must be a confusion, a mistake at the station," she stammered. "No confusion, Adeza," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He took a step closer, invading her space. "Confess, you did all this to get away with stealing from my company. You and Paul." "You're hallucinating. That bump on your head has made you crazy," she hissed, trying to brazen it out. "I know everything," he said, his voice dangerously low. "The fake invoices, the shell corporations, the warehouse." At the mention of the warehouse, her composure finally cracked. "And you're both going to jail." Just then Paul entered the room, drawn by their raised voices. He took in the scene, cheeks cold fury, Adiz's crumbling facade, and knew instantly that the jig was up. His friendly mask dropped away, revealing the serpent beneath. "Paul," Adizi cried out, her voice shrill with panic. "Yes," Paul said, his voice chillingly calm. "It was us, and now we're going to finish the job we started." He pulled a small, wicked-looking knife from inside his jacket pocket. "You should have stayed in that village where you belong, Chaik. You should have stayed dead." "You were supposed to be my best friend," Cheek said, his heart aching with the finality of the betrayal, a grief more profound than any physical pain. "Do what you have to do, Paul," Adizi urged, her eyes gleaming with a desperate, murderous malice. Paul lunged. Chaik, anticipating the attack, sidestepped, using his larger frame and a surge of adrenaline to shove Paul hard against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor, but Adizi came at him from the side, a wild animal, scratching at his face with her long nails. As they struggled, a chaotic three-way dance of desperation and rage, the sound of sirens suddenly filled the air, growing louder and louder, a beautiful, welcome scream. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and armed police officers swarmed into the foyer. "National Police, stay where you are." Amara stood in the doorway behind them, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale but resolute. She had followed him, unable to let him face them alone, and for the second time, she had saved his life. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, flashing cameras, and legal proceedings. The evidence of Adizi and Paul's embezzlement, which Cheek was now able to direct the auditors to, was overwhelming. Their attempt on his life, witnessed by the arresting officers, sealed their fate. Justice, swift and decisive, had been served. Days later, Cheek stood on Amara's veranda, the place where his new life had begun. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful silence now, not an empty one. The air smelled of rain-washed earth and blooming hibiscus. Amara came to stand beside him, handing him a glass of cool water. "I told you I could defend myself," she said, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. "Yes, I realize that," he said, his voice filled with an awe and gratitude that went beyond words. He turned to face her, taking her free hand in his. Her hand was warm, strong, real. "Well, I'd better go," she said softly, her gaze dropping to their joined hands, suddenly shy now that the danger had passed. "No, Amara," he said quickly, his grip tightening on her hand. "Don't go. Please stay here with me." "Cheik, that's a very quick decision," she cautioned, though she didn't pull her hand away. "You have a whole life to rebuild." "Maybe it is," he admitted, "but the one thing I never forgot, even when I had no memories, was how I felt when I was with you. That feeling of peace, of rightness. It was the only real thing I had. It was my anchor." He looked into her eyes, his own shining with an emotion that was raw, honest, and undeniable. "You're not going to tell me that you don't feel anything for me?" A single tear traced a shimmering path down her cheek. "I'm not going to deny that I feel something for you," she confessed, her voice thick with unshed emotion, "but this is all too fast." "Please stay with me," he begged, his voice soft and earnest, laying his soul bare. "You're the woman I've always dreamed of, even before I knew what my dreams were. You are my truest memory." She looked at him, at this man she had rescued from the side of the road, this man who had come back to her from the shadows of a profound betrayal. She saw not a victim, but a survivor, a good, honest man, and in his eyes she saw a future she had long since stopped hoping for, a future free from the blanket of loneliness. "Okay," she whispered, a radiant smile breaking through her tears, a sunrise after a long night. "I'll give us a chance. But we have to go slowly." "I love the idea," he breathed, his face alight with a joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. He leaned in to kiss her, but she playfully put a finger on his lips. "Wait," she said, her eyes sparkling with a newfound confidence and mischief. "I told you," slowly. He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness that filled the quiet air, a sound of homecoming. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, resting his chin on her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake not destruction, but the promise of a new dawn, and as they stood there, wrapped in the quiet peace of a love that had defied oblivion, they both knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that this was not an end, but the truest of beginnings.